My name is Vivian Hart, and I've spent the last 15 years of my life building something that wasn't mine, at least not officially. You wouldn't know it from looking at me, would you? I'm just another polished face in a tailored navy blazer, sitting quietly at board meetings, taking notes with a fountain pen, nodding when necessary. But beneath this calm exterior lies someone who knows every single secret of Kingsley and Hawthorne, the company we all loved, feared, and bled for. Today was different, though. Today wasn't about quarterly earnings or market projections. Today was about saying goodbye to Arthur Kingsley, the man who founded this empire on grit, ambition, and an unshakable belief in his vision. The church smelled like lilies, too sweet, too heavy, and as I sat there among the mourners, I couldn't help but think how strange it was to see so many people pretending to care, pretending to grieve. Some cried openly, others whispered behind gloved hands, and then there were those who couldn't wait to get back to their phones. Politics never stopped, even here. I hadn't shed a tear. Not because I didn't feel anything, oh no, quite the opposite, but because grief isn't always loud or wet. Sometimes it's quiet, silent. It sits inside you like a stone, growing heavier with each passing moment until you're forced to carry its weight alone. And God knows I've been carrying enough already. Arthur wasn't just my boss. He was my mentor, my confidant, my friend. When I first walked into his office fresh out of business school, armed with nothing but determination and a killer presentation, he saw something in me that no one else did. "You've got fire," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, eyes sharp and assessing. "But can you control it?" I promised him I could. Turns out I couldn't, not entirely. That fire burned brighter than either of us expected, illuminating paths neither of us had planned for. The eulogies droned on, predictable yet heartfelt. Words like visionary, pioneer, and leader echoed through the stained glass air. They painted a picture of Arthur as larger than life, untouchable, almost mythic. But they left out the parts that mattered most, the late-night strategy sessions fueled by coffee gone cold, the arguments over ethics versus profit margins, the rare moments of vulnerability when he admitted he didn't have all the answers. Those were the things I remembered. Those were the things I clung to now, as the final hymn faded into silence and the congregation filed out into the gray afternoon. As I stood beside the open casket during the private viewing, staring down at Arthur's still form, I felt conflicted. His face looked peaceful, almost serene, but I knew better. This man never rested, not even in death. His legacy loomed large, casting shadows over everyone who dared step into his shoes, including me. Because here's the thing, Arthur left me something. Something big. Something no one else knows about. Not yet, anyway. In his will, which I received 3 days ago, via courier, sealed with wax and stamped with the Kingsley crest, he bequeathed me 51% of the company. 51%. A controlling stake. Enough power to reshape the entire boardroom dynamic overnight. Enough leverage to make enemies tremble or allies bow. But I didn't say a word. Not at the funeral, not to anyone. Instead, I tucked the document safely away in my desk drawer, locked it tight, and went about my day as if nothing had changed. Because timing is everything, and revealing such a bombshell amidst mourning would have been cruel, even if some of these vultures deserved it. No, I decided, sipping tepid tea in the corner of the reception hall, I'd let them stew for a little while longer. Let them speculate, scheme, maneuver themselves into corners they couldn't escape from. Then, when the time was right, I'd walk into that boardroom and drop the hammer. The thought sent a thrill racing through me, electric and dangerous. Next week's meeting was going to be fun. Kingsley and Hawthorne wasn't just any company, it was the company. Founded 50 years ago by Arthur and his late partner, Eleanor Hawthorne. It started as a modest consulting firm operating out of a cramped office above a bakery downtown. Back then, they worked 80-hour weeks, surviving on stale bagels and caffeine pills, chasing clients door to door. Their breakthrough came when they secured a contract with one of the largest tech startups of the era, a deal brokered entirely by Eleanor, whose charm and tenacity were legendary. From there, the company grew exponentially, expanding into real estate development, venture capital investments, and eventually global markets. By the time I joined, K&H was a behemoth, with offices in 12 countries and revenue streams that made Fortune 500 executives green with envy. But size brought complications. Power struggles, betrayals, greed. Arthur often joked that running a corporation was like captaining a ship full of pirates, all eager to mutiny at the first sign of weakness. He wasn't wrong. Over the years, I watched alliances shift, fortunes rise and fall, reputations shattered overnight. Loyalty was a rare commodity, and trust even rarer. The boardroom was where the real battles took place. 12 seats arranged around a massive mahogany table, each occupied by individuals whose egos were as inflated as their stock portfolios. There was Margaret Duval, CFO and self-proclaimed Queen Bee, whose icy demeanor masked a razor-sharp mind capable of dismantling opponents in seconds. Gregory Langston, head of operations, who wore his arrogance like cologne. Strong, suffocating, impossible to ignore. And then there was Damian Cross, VP of Acquisitions, whose slick smile and silver tongue had earned him both admiration and suspicion in equal measure. They hated me, of course. Or rather, they tolerated me because Arthur trusted me implicitly. I represented everything they resented. Youth, ambition, and worst of all, access. While they plotted and schemed from the sidelines, I was in the trenches with Arthur, learning the intricacies of the business, earning his respect. To them, I was an outsider, an upstart who didn't belong. But what they failed to realize was that outsiders often see things insiders miss. Patterns, weaknesses, opportunities. And now, thanks to Arthur's will, I held the ultimate trump card. 51%. Controlling interest. The kind of power that could topple empires or build new ones. All I needed was patience, strategy, precision, and maybe a touch of ruthlessness. The morning after the funeral dawned crisp and clear, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee, poured myself a cup, and settled onto the couch with the envelope containing Arthur's will. For the 100th time, I read the words scrawled in his familiar handwriting. To Vivian Hart, my protégé and successor, I leave 51% of Kingsley and Hawthorne. Use it wisely. Successor. The word lingered in my mind, heavy with implication. Did Arthur truly intend for me to take over? Or was this his way of evening the playing field, giving me the tools to protect myself against the wolves circling closer with each passing day? Either way, the responsibility weighed heavily on my shoulders. I spent the rest of the morning drafting emails, reviewing reports, and preparing for next week's board meeting. On the surface, everything appeared normal, routine. But beneath the calm facade, my mind raced with possibilities. How should I play this? Announce my newfound power immediately and watch the chaos unfold? Or bide my time, letting tension simmer until the perfect moment presented itself? A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Standing on the other side was Damian Cross, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, holding a bottle of expensive whiskey. "Vivian," he said smoothly, flashing that practiced grin. "May I come in?" I hesitated. Of all the board members, Damian was the most unpredictable, a master manipulator who thrived on exploiting weaknesses. Inviting him into my home felt risky, but refusing might raise suspicions. "Sure," I replied, stepping aside. "What brings you here?" He entered without waiting for further invitation, glancing around the room with calculated interest. "Thought you could use a drink," he said, setting the bottle on the counter. "Funerals are tough." "They are," I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. "Thanks for stopping by." Damian leaned against the kitchen island, studying me intently. "You handled yourself well today. Classy, composed. Arthur would have been proud." "Thank you," I said, forcing a small smile. "That means a lot." He tilted his head slightly, as if trying to gauge my reaction. "Listen, Vivian, I know things are uncertain right now. With Arthur gone, there's bound to be some reshuffling, changes, but I want you to know you have allies here. People who value your contributions, your insight. Translation, we need you on our side." I resisted the urge to laugh. If only he knew. "I appreciate that, Damian. Truly. But I'm focused on honoring Arthur's legacy for now. Keeping things stable." His expression flickered, just briefly, before smoothing back into its usual mask of charm. "Of course. Stability is key. Still, if you ever need anything, advice, support, you know where to find me." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, ushering him toward the door. Once he was gone, I exhaled sharply, leaning against the wall. So the games had already begun. Good. Let them underestimate me. Let them think they could win me over with flattery and empty promises. By the time the truth came out, it would be far too late for them to do anything about it. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work, immersing myself in spreadsheets, presentations, and endless emails. Distraction was essential. Idle hands led to reckless decisions, and I couldn't afford to make any mistakes, not now. Every interaction, every conversation, was carefully curated, designed to project confidence without revealing too much. Margaret called twice, ostensibly to discuss upcoming projects, but her questions carried an undercurrent of probing curiosity. Gregory sent a memo suggesting a restructuring of departmental budgets, subtly positioning himself as a potential interim leader. Even quieter players, like Sophie Chun from marketing and Marcus Reed in legal, began circling cautiously, testing waters, gauging reactions. Through it all, I remained silent, observant, calculating. Each piece of information, each subtle shift in dynamics, added another layer to the intricate puzzle unfolding before me. And with every passing hour, the anticipation grew stronger, sweeter. Next week's board meeting loomed ahead like a storm cloud, dark and charged with potential energy. I imagined walking into that room, placing the signed ownership papers on the table, and watching the shock ripple across their faces. Would they protest, argue, try to negotiate, or would they simply sit there, stunned into silence, realizing too late that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably? Whatever happened, one thing was certain. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Arthur had entrusted me with his life's work, and I intended to honor that trust, not just by protecting it, but by wielding it. After all, revenge was best served cold, and I had plenty of ice left. The day of the board meeting arrived, crisp and clear, as if the universe itself was mocking the storm brewing inside me. I woke early, dressed meticulously in a deep burgundy suit, a color bold enough to command attention, but subtle enough not to scream defiance. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my cuffs one last time, I caught a glimpse of something unfamiliar in my reflection, determination laced with quiet fury. This wasn't just about power or revenge, it was about justice for Arthur, for myself, and for every moment we'd sacrificed to build this company while others plotted against us. Walking into the towering glass building that housed Kingsley and Hawthorne's headquarters felt surreal. The lobby buzzed with employees rushing to their desks, oblivious to the drama unfolding above them. Elevator doors slid open on the executive floor, revealing Margaret Duval already stationed outside the boardroom, her sharp eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You're early," she remarked, her voice clipped. It wasn't a compliment. "So are you," I replied evenly, offering her a tight smile before slipping past her into the room. One by one, they filed in, Gregory Langston, his usual smugness replaced by an air of forced composure, Damien Cross, who seemed unusually subdued, Sophie Chin clutching her tablet like a shield, Marcus Reed fidgeting with his tie. They all looked tense, guarded, as though bracing themselves for some unseen attack. Little did they know, the weapon was already in the room. Arthur's chair sat empty at the head of the table, a stark reminder of his absence. No one dared take it, though I suspected more than one person had considered it. Instead, they settled into their usual seats, exchanging terse glances and hushed whispers. The atmosphere crackled with tension, thick enough to cut with a knife. When everyone was seated, I rose slowly, drawing every pair of eyes toward me. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Today marks a new chapter for Kingsley and Hawthorne, not just because of Arthur's passing, but because of what comes next." Margaret raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "And what exactly is that, Vivian? Do enlighten us." I smiled thinly, reaching into my briefcase. "Arthur left behind a will," I said, placing the document on the table with a soft thud. "In it, he made provisions for the future leadership of this company." A murmur rippled through the room. Gregory leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "Provisions? What kind of provisions?" "Specific ones," I replied, sliding the envelope across the polished wood toward the center of the table. "He bequeathed 51% of Kingsley and Hawthorne to me." Silence fell like a hammer blow. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then chaos erupted. What? Margaret snapped, her icy facade crumbling. That's impossible. Damien shot up from his seat, his face flushed with anger. This has to be a mistake. There's no way Arthur would. He did. I interrupted, my tone steelier now. It's all right here, signed and notarized. You can read it yourselves if you'd like. Sophie reached for the envelope hesitantly, her hands trembling as she pulled out the papers. She scanned them quickly, her expression shifting from disbelief to resignation. Marcus muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Gregory slammed his fist on the table, his composure finally breaking. This is outrageous, he barked. You've been playing us this whole time. No, I corrected him, my voice rising slightly. I've been doing my job, supporting Arthur, protecting his vision, something none of you ever truly cared about. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Don't presume to lecture us about loyalty, Vivian. We've poured decades into this company. Blood, sweat, everything. And now you think you can waltz in and take control? Just like that. I didn't ask for this. I shot back, my temper flaring. Arthur gave it to me. Maybe because he knew you'd never respect someone like me unless I had the upper hand. Maybe because he trusted me more than any of you. For a long moment, no one said anything. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air, suffocating and undeniable. Finally, Damien sank back into his seat, running a hand through his hair. So, what happens now? I took a deep breath, letting the question hang for a beat before answering. Now we move forward, together. But let's be clear, things are going to change. No more backstabbing, no more scheming. From this point on, decisions will be made based on what's best for the company, not personal agendas. Margaret crossed her arms, glaring at me. And if we don't agree? Then perhaps you should consider whether this is still the place for you, I said firmly. My gaze swept over the room, daring anyone to challenge me further. To my surprise, no one did. Not yet, anyway. In the weeks that followed, the transition wasn't easy. Resistance lingered beneath the surface, manifesting in passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled attempts to undermine my authority. But I held my ground, leveraging both the legal weight of my stake and the knowledge I'd accumulated over the years. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Some, like Sophie and Marcus, came around, recognizing the value of stability and collaboration. Others, like Margaret and Gregory, dug in their heels, refusing to accept the new order. One evening, as I worked late in Arthur's old office, I found myself staring at his portrait hanging on the wall. His piercing eyes seemed to bore into mine, full of wisdom and unspoken expectations. I wondered if he'd foreseen how difficult this journey would be, or if he'd believed in me enough to trust I'd rise to the occasion. You always were a gambler, I murmured, raising my coffee mug in a silent toast. Let's hope your bet pays off. As I turned back to my desk, a notification popped up on my computer screen. An email from Damien, of all people. The subject line read, simply, proposal. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a carefully worded message outlining a potential partnership, one that could strengthen the company's position in emerging markets. At the bottom, he'd added a postscript. Thought it might interest you. Truce? I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. Perhaps there was hope for redemption after all. The road ahead wouldn't be smooth, but then again, nothing worth fighting for ever was. And as I sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future, I realized something important. This wasn't just about carrying Arthur's torch. It was about lighting my own.